my topic for the evening. And because I'm the host, I'm last, so you'll have to stick around. Well, something like that, or batting ninth. Everybody's going to drool for my entire session. All right, so what I've given you again on the sheet is the second part of the preliminary service there, the outline that we had given out the first week. It just subtracted that out and put it in there so you can see what we're looking at. This again is a warm-up in a sense, but we described in the ancient world, the first part of the service was done at home, where all the blessings were associated. This is where they'd walk into the synagogue. This is where they would normally start. And that's with Baruch She'amar. It was common upon walking in to start, as I mentioned, with reading the entire book of Psalms. The rabbis would get into the mood of prayer before they even began with Baruch Hu by reading the entire book of Psalms. And what happened over time is we now include random psalms, and then the highlight of everything is the last 6 psalms of the book, starting with Ashrei, 145, and going to 150. Okay, and so that 145 to 150 was a remnant. It was a reminder that they used to read the entire book. Now, in most congregations today, what we read is 145 and 150, which is a reminder that we used to read the 6, which is a reminder that we used to read the 150. Okay, and so that's what we've got at this point. It's a symbolic gesture that is meant to take us back to temple times when we begin the process of prayer. So if you open up to 122, you should have prayer books nearby. We're in a sanctuary, that would be a good thing. 122. Okay, you have here Baruch She'amar. If you look at the bottom of the page, it concludes with a blessing. It's Baruch Atah Adonai, Melech Muhulal Batish Pachot, and I translate it here, praise are you, sovereign, celebrated with songs of praise. Meaning, here come Psalms. That's its message. Here come Psalms. And when we do Yishtabach at the end, you'll see the blessing that concludes there finishes up with, oh yeah, we just read Psalms. But you see this pattern continually. It's the same thing as when you read Torah. When you read Torah, there's a blessing before and after. When we recite Hallel, which is another series of Psalms, we say a blessing before, we say a blessing after. So biblical readings within the context of the service are surrounded often by an opening and a closing blessing. It's the same pattern, okay? All right. So so we know what we're talking about, let's just read this prayer. Do I have a volunteer? Okay. Martin, why don't you begin, and we'll just, as we go through, we'll go on from there. Go ahead. It's just start off with, blessed is the one. Okay, and then it goes down to the bottom of the page, the singular one who gives life to the world, the sovereign who is praised and glorified forever and ever. This is your great name, Baruch Atah, sovereign, celebrated with songs of praise. Okay, what is the theme here? Baruch. Okay, Baruch. That's the theme. All right, it's no accident that if we started the preliminary service, when we began the service at the very beginning, what was the whole list of blessings? Baruch Atah and the rooster and all the other kinds of things we talked about. Today, when we get to the second section, it's all Baruchs. When we start the Shachar, it begins with Baruch Hu. It's all the same thing. They're all kicking off with this sense of blessing, proclaiming God's greatness, God's uniqueness, and by the way, again, I want to point out that it's always in the passive form. It's not we who bless God. We are declaring any Hebrew word that has an u in it, not any, The great majority of words that have the "u" in it, it's telling you it's passive. So instead of I bless God, I'm declaring that God is blessed. So the status of God's blessing is clear. I'm not doing anything then announcing what is evident, what's self-evident. I'm not extending blessings to God. I can't. All right? And that's an important distinction. God doesn't need the blessings. It's we who need to recite the blessings. It changes us when we do that. We're by nature egocentric. We're very involved in our own world, and rightfully so, and it's the way of life. And blessed prayer is meant to say, get out of that. Put aside the egocentrism. Yeah. Baruch Hu is the command form, okay? Baruch is just is blessed. Baruch Hu is and God is blessed, but it's a command, okay? It's the same passive form, but there's a commanded nature to what we're doing in that setting, okay? So what this text does, it's very interesting. You've got here a whole list of things, identities about God. These are identities that the rabbis found within either the Midrash, they found in the Talmud, and they went through and listed all of them out, per se. At the same time, they concluded it with Baruch Shemo, which essentially in this case is meant, based on Maimonides, to mean etc. All right? In other words, there's no list that's going to be complete. So they recognized that and said, here's a list, by the way, it's not complete. But let's look at their list and see what we've got here. All right, so the first thing to note is it's in dyads. As a general rule, it will be in two baruchs together. The biblical form, biblical poetry is written in dyad form. It'll say the same thing twice in different words. Sometimes one explains the other, but you find that throughout biblical poetry. It'll repeat itself. And so let's take a look here, all right? So you have, blessed is the one whose word called the world into being. Blessed is the one who created the world. There's the example. Could it be more repetitive? Okay, but it is, all right? So what is being said here? The first is that you're starting out with recognizing God as creator. Plain and simply, that's the beginning. Whether or not you want to accept the biblical version, whether or not you want to accept the scientific explanations, none of them preclude God's involvement. Even if the Big Bang is the answer, that doesn't preclude God from being involved in the Big Bang. All right? Where does it begin? The other thing that's noted here is that how does God create? If you look back at the Exodus story, God says, and it is. It's fiat. Right? There's no competition for God. There's no I have to put up building plans and apply to the right boards to make sure I can put up the house the right way and to make sure all my construction, which will be delayed because it'll rain. None of that is in play. Okay? God says, and therefore it is. What's also implied here is a rejection of the paganistic understanding that before the world is created, there are many gods who are all fighting amongst themselves. There is no alternative. It's God. The Bible begins, Bereshit, bara, as God as began to create God. Okay? There's no before God. It doesn't deal with that. All the old ancient, the Mesopotamian and all the other creation stories begin with this battle between gods. The Bible very deliberately says, I reject that, by starting out with God and saying that is the starting point. There's no attempt to try to figure out where did God come from. None. Zero. So all that's in that little 2 words, whatever it is. Next one. Baruch Hosef, God is the one who speaks and it is done. Blessed is the one who decrees and fulfills. So again, it's this creation by fiat. And the second is his promises. When he makes a promise, it comes about. God's promises, God's words. You can trust the word of God because it will be fulfilled. Just as divine speech creates the world, our world is also created by us, our own words. We're imitating God. When we speak out loud, we make things more real. For ourselves, for sure. You know, a lot of things just don't get said, but when you put it into words, suddenly you got to deal with it. Right? So this power of speech, and once you've created an inner world, then you create an external world because you then act on that. Words are more powerful. And then you have Baruch Hu. Taken together with the end, you have this common phrase of Baruch Hu, Uvaruch Shemo. That's what we say when you say, a couple of the kids, I'm sitting in the lessons with them, and they'll go, Baruch Atah Adonai, and I'll go, Baruch Hu Uvaruch Shemo, and they'll go, what? What, did I do something wrong? That is, in a blessing, that's the response. Baruch Hu, blessed is he, Uvaruch Shemo, and blessed is his name. All right, and then at the end you say Amen. So after the Baruch Hu, Uvaruch Shemo, you've got this. Baruch Merachem al haaretz, and then al habriot. God has compassion for the earth and for all his creatures. This idea of mercy is critical. So reading number 1, Beverly, you've got it. This is from Midrash in Genesis Rabbah. Okay, so essentially God's mercy is a fundamental biblical theme. The idea here again, everything is in biblical parallelism, and the Hebrew is saying, or the Midrash is saying rather, that if God created a world full of justice, we couldn't survive. Plain and simply, if we were held accountable for everything we did, the world would not survive. On the other hand, if God is fully merciful, the world would be chaos. It has to be a blend of both justice and mercy, and God both play out here. God has mercy for the world, God has mercy for those who live in the world, the inhabitants, and that's what you've got there in that dyad. The Hebrew word for mercy, very interesting word, mirachem. Baruch mirachem al haaretz, Baruch mirachem al habriot, on the earth and on the creatures. Mirachem at its essence is rechem. Rechem is a womb. Okay, and so there's a sense here that God's mercy thus emerges from the mother's compassion. It's meant to evoke the motherly compassion when you talk about mercy. And having given birth to the world, and that's how this is presented, it's as if God is concerned with the entire world's welfare, the way a mother would take care of her child. Very interesting comment. If you look at 122, at the bottom there, on 122 in the bottom on the right-hand side, compassionate creator. Follow this along with me. The word translated here as compassionate comes from the root rechem, which also means womb. That's what I said, right? Thus, this particular phrase can be understood as the fatherly womb, and wonderfully captures the way that God transcends gender. Something I never considered until I found it here. It's a very interesting concept. God is a creator. Now, what's the implication is that God has gender and God is a man, okay, and I'm not sure that's intended, but that's what the commentary is suggesting. But this God is also the source of life, and therefore it's a fatherly womb. It's an interesting comment, and I'll let you write your own drash and your own sermons on it. Next we have Baruch Chai Kayam LaNetzach. Let's see. Did I miss something? Oh yeah. Baruch Mishalem Sachar Tov L'Reav. I knew I missed something. God rewards. All right? God can be relied upon to pay the reward. Now the question then becomes, and that's my next lecture at Beth Yeshurun, how do we understand that when things don't go well? I'm a good person and things went poorly, and there's lots of answers to that, and you have to come for another lecture. All right, but the understanding is that ultimately, good behavior is rewarded, bad behavior is not. Despite what we see, we can make sense of the world is the intent. All of this is meant to say that creation has a pattern. The purpose of creation is to give a world to humanity that works, from which we can make sense, which we can anticipate what's going to happen. The seasons flow in their sequence. All of life flows in some kind of sequence. You know, we all know we're getting older, If we couldn't anticipate that, one day you get younger and the next day you get older, you couldn't anticipate anything. Although it would be nice. God is eternal. Baruch Kayam Lanetza. God exists forever. And essentially what this is, it's not just that God, remember I said to you, the creation story begins with God, there's no before. There's no after. But there's another intent here. It's not only is God internal, but God is eternally involved in some way in the universe. He has an active concern with the world. He remains involved in the maintenance of the world. And this is very deliberately a contrast, again, to many of the pagan beliefs that God created and then stepped out of the world. That's deism. It's one of the things about deism. God would no longer be involved. Okay, this is a statement here of God remains involved. Doesn't mean he's involved in every, the ball players and all their, thank you God for helping me win. I don't think that's the case. Okay, but on a bigger picture level, there's an involvement of God. Baruch Podeh Umatzil. God is a rescuer. He rescues us from physical distress. He rescues us from moral decline. And essentially that this role of God being eternal and involved is God's rescue can be anticipated. So we always talk about rescues from the past. We talk about the Song of the Sea, and it's always concluded up following that with the ultimate redemption at the end of time.
It seems like this dyadic structure is kind of the path midway through. Why is that?
It is and it isn't. So right after all his creatures, that's where you see, I imagine you see where it ends, okay? Blessed is the one who sends a just reward, and blessed is the one who is eternal and exists forever. It's in a sense, the reward is part of that eternity. I'm not sure exactly, you can see it or not see it, and you're right. It isn't as self-evident once you get past the creature piece of it, yeah. But I think the rabbis would have seen a connection between one verse and the next. And then it concludes with this, as I talked before, this Baruch Shemo. By the way, there's an etc. here, because no list will be complete when describing God. And let me just finish. Maimonides says all lists of God, by definition, are incomplete. You're right, until it's all third person. Yeah, okay. Right, well, yeah, and the Bible starts out, that's exactly the case. It doesn't, it's just God. In the beginning, God. In the beginning, God created. All right, and so our job is not to prove, but to engage with God and hear the intent, because we're going to read Psalms. We don't really engage with God directly until Baruch Hu. This is all mind setting. This is all creating the mindset so we can go into prayer at Baruch Hu. So it's talking about God. Does that help? Or did I not address your question?
At no point did I think that he's talking about anything not God.
Right. Oh, I see. Even the word God is not there. Yeah. It shows up in the later part of the blessing here. As you go down the page, Baruch Atah Adonai, that's where it starts. It shows up. So this is the listing, and then it goes into the blessing itself. You're right. That's correct. Any thoughts on Baruch Shema? You have a sense of this is how you're kicking off the service as a community and getting this the blessing that leads into the Psalms. So let's talk Psalms. Some Psalms, on my sabbatical, I decided to read the book of Psalms again. It's one of the things I did during that time. They're all over the place. It's wonderful reading, but some celebrate national victory. Some pray for God's intercession. Some have individualistic focus. Some are prayers of thanksgiving after somebody has escaped a deadly disease or something. Some have a political or a public subject with little relationship to worship, such as the kingship psalms, which we recite on Friday night, and the psalms of the praise of Zion. So you cannot categorize. It's almost like just a list of poems of human needs in the collective and the singular. It's very difficult to categorize them. So with that in mind, this prayer ends at the bottom of the page with Melech Muhulal Batish Bachot, celebrated with songs of praise, and therefore it is a lead-in to all the hymns that we're about to do, and the psalms which we're about to do. I'm going to jump ahead a little bit. There is a tradition, you'll see me do this, my rabbi taught me this, that when you say this at the end, you gather the tzitzit, and at the end when you say Melech Muhulal Batish Bachot, you kiss the tzitzit. All right. That's in Shema, that's not here. Yeah, that's not here. That's another time you gather the tzitzit, you're right. Okay? But here, it's I don't know where the tradition emerged. It's something, and I've come across it in writing. I've not seen any reason for it, but I do it because my rabbi said do it, so I do it. Throughout the ages, these psalms have been the most moving, the most personally relevant of all the books of the Bible. They are used constantly. They're used by Jews. They're used by Christians. I think I mentioned I went to an Easter service one year with a friend, and I realized they're saying the exact same things we do it in Hebrew, they do it in English. They have this other extra part, okay? But in terms of the Psalms permeate their prayers the same way they permeate ours. These are referred to as Tehillim, as praises, technically, but as I said to you, it's highly, highly diverse. We have God is presented in these Psalms as compassionate. God is presented in these Psalms as a warrior. Both, okay? There's some of them, you see certain kinds of formats. In Hallel, we sing about God's connection to Israel, and then the house of Aaron, and then those who fear God, and so there's all sorts of divisions of the people, but essentially the end of this whole section will be Nishmat Kol Chai, that every living being, everyone praises God. I say that a couple times in the Bima, is when we get to Nishmat. It's sort of the concluding theme of the whole section. All right? And you have all sorts of poetries, and kind of poetry. You see Kili Olam Chasdo. Alf Iverson leads when he's up there, he often leads the psalm with Kili Olam Chasdo over and over and over and over. There's a power to that repeating. The power. In Hallel, it's also the Kili Olam Chasdo. God is forever. For his compassion is forever. Okay? I want you to look at the list I've given you on the back of the page. I decided to spend an afternoon one day, because I had nothing to do, and figure out how are the Psalms used for us. So let's go through this. In the weekday evening service, you're going to find Psalm 91. In the Kabbalat Shabbat, in the service we have prior to Ma'ariv on Friday night, you have the Kingship Psalms, 95 all the way through 99. We then read Psalm 29. Each of those 5 plus the 1 equals 6, represent the 6 days of the week. We then have a psalm for the Shabbat, and we throw on one more, Psalm 3. In our service, we're looking at here, Psalm 92, again, for Shabbat, Psalm for the day. If it were a different day of the week, I listed out all the Psalms you would say. There's a Psalm for Rosh Chodesh. In our Machzor, you have a Psalm for, not even put it here, there's one for Elul, there's one for Rosh Hashanah, there's one for Sukkot, there's one for Yom Kippur, etc. But the rest of the way, you can just see there's a whole list, 19, 34, 90, 91, 135, etc., that all are part of the service that we're using. They're fully invested in the service. Hallel, 113 to 118, that's basically what Hallel is. Psalms, all right? Tehillim, Hallel, same word. Returning the Torah, we say 145. On Shabbat, we sing 29. We sing all right, 24 on a weekday. Yizkor, you all know Adonai Roi, the Lord is my shepherd. On Mincha, we do 145, we do Ashrei again, and then Psalm 24. At funerals, by the way, at funerals, there's lots of different, it's become here very common that we do Adonai Roi, that the Lord is my shepherd. It's only one of various psalms that can be used in that. I've done many different psalms in the course of my career at funerals. Psalm 90, Psalm 121, which essentially is Esa Eina El Harim, I lift my eyes up to the heavens. Okay? There are other psalms that just become here in the synagogue. It may be in Houston, I'm not sure. That's the psalm. But the tradition has others as well. At a brief, we say Psalm 8. When someone's ill, 6, 119 and 57. Bir Karamazon, Shir Amalot, 126. you can see that the book of Psalms is just permeating all of religious life. Right? I'm sure I've left out, oh yeah, I know there's another one that's, I'll talk about in a second. It's Psalm number 1. Ashrei ha'ish asher halach, happy is the man who follows God's ways. That's also, I've done that for a male at a funeral. Right? So, but it's used in many other places as well. So Psalms permeate. Now I want to talk about these last 6 because that is the core of this opening section of the service. Psalms 145 to 140 to 150. It became obligatory during the 2nd century, that too. Obligatory in the 2nd century as part of the service. They're meant to lead us gradually into a deeper and deeper state of kavanah. It's as if we've awakened, our physical needs are met, we're now ready for this higher realm, this higher visualization, a meditation on God's wonders, and a creating of the Levitical experience in the temple. So, let's turn to 145. You know it as Ashrei. It's on page 145 is on 136. Page 136. First thing to note is the 3rd line, Tehillah LeDavid. This is the final psalm in the book that is directly attributed to David. Tehillah LeDavid, it's a psalm of David's. Okay? This technically is, Ashrei is supposed to be recited 3 times a day. It's said here in Pesukei de Zimra. It would be said right before the Musaf service. It's said in the Mincha service as well. We're told in the Mishnah in Brachot that whoever recites this psalm 3 times a day is guaranteed a place in the afterlife. This triple repetition obviously is one of emphasis. Obviously, if you're going to say something that repeatedly, it's obviously important. But it's also reflective of the fact that that's true in all of our prayers. When we say 3 times happens quite often. Adonai, Adonai El Rakum, we do that 3 times. Kol Nidre, 3 times. That which is core, there's a legal way of declaring it, and that was by doing it 3 times. In Mincha. It's not in Mariv. No. Yeah. Good. Yeah. No, you're right. It's not in Mariv. It's only in Mincha. Yes. Now, notice, I'm intrigued that the book doesn't mention this in any way. If you look at the first 2 lines, Ashrei, both of them start Ashrei before Tehillah LeDavid. They're not part of the psalm. They come from 2 other psalms, from Psalm 84 and Psalm 144. They're an introduction to the psalm, which begins Aromimcha. So there's a prologue that introduces the prayer. And the other thing is the word Ashrei is happy are. Osher is happy. Ashrei it's a smichut form. It just means that there's another noun coming up right away. Happy are those that. Okay? The next word's also, a at the end of a word will generally tell you there's another noun following. Okay, and so you combine the 2. Happy are, you'll hear me announce the prayer often saying, Ashrei Yoshvei Vetecha, because to say Ashrei is happy are those. Happy are, and you'll leave it off with no, this doesn't mean anything. It's one of the reasons you can't really say a davar. Davar is a word. Divar is a word of. It's really Devar Torah, a word of prayer, a Torah, a word of prayer, Devar Tefillah. You can't really, so it's become sort of the colloquial, but it really makes no sense to leave it halfway through, a word of one. Right? Ashrei, happy are. Another, just 2 things to note. I want to just notice as well. Years ago, I'm leading the service. This just occurred to me. It's my own insight into the service. We finish Yisker. The very first word after Yisker is Ashrei. Happy. It's kind of weird. And I think that in a sense, the way in which this word is used, it's not necessarily happy in a joyous, celebratory kind of mode. It's happiness through meaning. It's more joy than it is happy. I use the example all the time. Children, you're not happy raising children, you get a lot of joy out of it. Sometimes you want to kill them, okay? But there's a lot of joy in the process. It's not this utter sort of happiness of everybody celebrating and drinking and having a good time. And in that sense, Ashrei makes sense following. You're shifting from Yizkor into a more meaningful thought process about the world and happiness in that way.
If I'm not mistaken, the prayer Ashrei was used on Mrs.
You're talking, yeah, right,
Yeah,
very
and
early.
the children would come on the
Right.
and each one had a line.
Right. Right. It's a very nice tradition. Ashrei also, the challenge with Ashrei is the Hebrew is impossible. It's a very difficult prayer to read the Hebrew to, plain and simply. You've got umem shaltacha, you have the singular possessive, you've got the plural possessive, echa, icha. It's all over the place. There are words that are 6 syllables and 4 syllables and 5. It's not like I've learned to read Hebrew. This is, I've got to somehow break my teeth on it. It's a lot more difficult. And so Ashrei was sort of an example of it. I've conquered the reading. Okay, I'm not sure that was the case, but symbolically that was the intent. As a matter of fact, I'm sure that's not the case. By 3rd grade, they haven't conquered it. All right. So the fact, yes. When you've done Yizkor, what you said, I'm just repeating it for people online. Right. Right. That is correct. That's correct. I remember reading somewhere, only for the fool are happiness and sadness completely separate. It's not the way life works. It's not real. Right. All right. So there are 3. Yes, Russ. For wealth? I don't know. I will look it up. I don't know the answer. Forgive me. That wealth can be a source of happiness. So this other meaning of Osher, it's not happy in the joyous sense. It's happy in that, I have money, I can help, I can do, right. Yeah, in that sense, yeah, for sure. It might be. Forgive me, my modern Hebrew is not great. My biblical Hebrew is better. Okay? I always worry about going to Israel and breaking out into the equivalent of Shakespearean English. So there's 3 underlying messages that go through Ashrei. It starts out with people are happy, but when are they happy? When they're close to God. It's about the relationship. That's the source of it. It's then God cares about the poor and the oppressed. And then God rewards good behavior and punishes evil. So you have proximity, compassion, and judgment that are all at play, and they go through in sequence. The first half of the prayer focuses on God's transcendence. I always use Avinu, Malkeinu as the example for this. Avinu is our father, Malkeinu is our king. They convey 2 very different images. Avinu is the immanent element, the way we connect to God. And Malkeinu as a king is how do you connect fully to a God who creates the universe and rules? All right, it's the same God. It's just elements the same way we bring different parts of ourselves to different situations. Okay, so you start out with God in transcendence. You can finish up the prayer with God in immanence, and you'll see throughout that again this dyad concept. It plays out here. Each verse alternates between addressing God directly and then addressing God in 3rd person. You, God is great. It goes back and forth between the 2. It's very deliberate. That may be because it may have been a choral piece. All right, so one group sang one group sang the other. We don't know how it was sung, but the Psalms in general were sung. And so it's very likely it was written in a way in which it had all of these choir pieces built in. Oftentimes you'll see at the end of it, you have the word Selah. We don't know what the heck this word means. Okay? Some suggest it means forever, but the reality of it is likely it was a choral note built in. When you see the word Selah, it was likely that they were saying something to the choir. All right? So you have that here as well. Look at 136 at the bottom. All that is mortal. All right? It says in Psalm 145, there are no references to the temple, to Israel, or to historical events. God is depicted here as the sovereign of the world who cares for all his creatures. This is a universalistic prayer. It is not directed at Israel. All the world, at the end, all flesh, all life is declaring God's greatness. It's very deliberately a universalistic prayer. Yes, sir. What's that? God doesn't, that's what I said before, is God, it's not God's needs, it's our needs. By stopping and praising God, we change. We stop being the center of the world. That's the key to praising God, is to get out of our egocentrism. That's why we're saying, that's why it's in the passage. God is praise. We're not changing God's status of praise. We're declaring it's that we change.
Are we talking about the reciting of the Psalms before the Tanakh reached the final form?
No. It's certainly, probably first century was where it reached its first, maybe early second century, that it reached its final stage. And we know of examples of Ashrei earlier. All right, so no, it was written prior to that stage, the Psalms in general. Which takes me, you've set me up here. And then I'll come back to something else, but you set me up. If you look at, again, it's an acrostic. All right, you look at meaning, each verse, Aromimka is an aleph, Bechol is a bet, Gadol is a gimel. Each verse is alphabetical throughout. It goes through the entire alphabet of the Hebrew, with the exception of, there's no nun. There's a nun missing. So I'm jumping ahead because you took me there.
Is there a reason for that?
Okay, so yeah, of course the rabbis wouldn't let something like that go unnoticed. There's a common supposition that this is a scribal error. Okay? There's a supposition that something is missing because. And now, the rabbis themselves, we know, by the way, that if that nun, because the nun is, I'm going to stay here, I'm sorry. Because the nun is missing, the rabbis looked for a reason it was missing. And they came up with the idea that the word must stand for nephilah, fallen. And that in no way is part of this claim of God's greatness. It seems to be in contradistinction from the entire intent of the prayer. In the absence of information, you can make some up. All right? Lo and behold. And by the way, whatever the nun is missing, we know by the 3rd century there are already comments about the nun being missing. And so therefore, if it's missing, it happened very early. Okay? So, along come the Dead Sea Scrolls, found in the early 1900s, and lo and behold, there's a verse there that says, Ne'eman, faithful. They find the Ashrei and it has a nun. Okay, so the assumption then becomes scribal error. Somebody copied it. You remember, no printing press. Somebody copied it, and oops, away goes a verse. And that's what got transferred down. You see that in the Vulgate, you see it in the Septuagint, you see it in the Dead Sea Scrolls. They all have a verse that says, faithful is God in all his ways and merciful in all his ways and merciful in all his works. That's the verse that got inserted. It's now, if you go to Christian texts and you look at Psalm 145, that's there. It's not in Judaism. The Bible, once it got fixed, doesn't get touched. It's not just a prayer, it's from the Bible. All right, prayers we change. Biblical texts we don't, and it's not. But not everyone agrees about that scribal error. Okay, let me tell you the following. The words, with the exception of the first word, ne'eman, this verse is identical to Tzadik Adonai B'chol Derachav. All right, it is identical to another verse. It is possible that the scribal error, someone put it in, copied the other verse and put it in by changing it. Didn't know where they were missing a nun and decided we need a nun and we put it in, and copied another verse and just changed the first word. So there's not agreement. So it could be anything. So you ask me, is there a reason? Okay, what do you want to believe? You have the early rabbis who came up with a theory of it's a wrong message. You've got later texts, or texts we find that have a verse, and you have those who are saying, well, that is a mistake in itself because it's simply a copying of a later verse in the same prayer. Who knows? Who knows? We know that in the Aramaic Targum and in other Greek versions other than the Septuagint, again, the nun is being left out. So you have the Septuagint with it and other Greek translations where it's not there. So it's not 100% clear. But nonetheless, as Jews, once the Bible was said, we don't change it. It is what it is. We have to live with it. We do what we can. A couple other things about this prayer. You have the verse, the Zion verse, which is Vizokef. I'm sorry, the Vav verse. That's not right. Vizokef. Oh, I'm sorry. So about 2/3 of the way down. Somech Adonai lechol hanoflim. God lifts up all those who are fallen. Vizokef lechol hakufim, which is he's saying the same thing. Remember, this is the biblical dyad. Kifufim are those who are doubled, meaning they're doubled over. And God gives them this ability to stand up. From that, the rabbis deduced that when we say God's name, we have to be standing. Okay? So you'll see me when we get to the Amidah, do the following. I sort of stretch out on top so I can stand up again. Okay? I'm acting out the rabbinic obligation to be standing because God is the source of that ability to stand. Well, that for sure. Yeah, absolutely. There's no idol worship involved for sure in Judaism. That's a constant theme throughout. Yep. I lost my place. Okay. Just here's a piece of trivia for you. Ashrei, how many psalms are there in the book of Psalms? 150, right? How many words are in the Ashrei? 150. Is there any meaning in that? You get to decide. So why this 3 times and therefore it's the core? And it's so important to us. The rabbi suggests there's a particular verse here, the Talmud suggests, that the verse, Poteach et yadecha, open your hand, umasbiach lechol chayratzon, and all will be satisfied. In other words, God is the source of food and our needs. That among Ashkenazim, it's become, when you do this, you touch your hand, and some touch their hand when they get to the hand tefillin, when they get to open your hand, and the word ratzon, your desires, they touch the hand. Others, you'll see a lot of people do. I see Eliezer do this, I do this. Open your hand, you'll see them put out a hand like this. All right. There are a number of ways of playing out the importance of this verse. Elliot Dorff suggests he likes a different verse as the core. He thinks that that's not it. He says the verse that should be core to this prayer is Karov Adonai L'Chol Korav Asher Yikra'uhu Ve'emet. Close to God are those who are. God is close to those who call upon God, who get close to God, and who call upon him in truth. All right, with the truthful. And what he is saying is, which verse you focus on changes the theology of what you think is core to this prayer. Poteach et yadecha is God as provider. God gives. Karov is God as we're in deep relationship with God. And if you want to see God as simply as someone who gives, and gives us and takes care of us, it's one way to see the core message. His message is that's not it. It's about relationship. The whole point of prayer is to get closer to God. So he suggests that Karov is the real central message of the prayer. The Talmud says otherwise. Again, this is true pilpul. This is true arguments for the sake of arguments and to make sense of something. There's no real practical outcome from it. Okay? And it's a way of taking the prayer apart and playing the game of what's more important. You do this with the kids all the time. It's value clarification. So is he right? Yes. Is he wrong? Yes. I think he'd say the same thing. All right, that is Ashrei. Any questions? I know we haven't covered the entire prayer. But you have here the beginning of the last 6 Psalms, Ashrei. You then have another series of Psalms that follow it. Each one of them builds in intensity. You see that both in theme and in the frequency of the word hallelujah. All right, in the Psalm 146, the one that follows this, hallelujah, or some way praising God, is mentioned 4 times. And it's sort of a calm description of God as the righteous creator and the protector of the weak. 2 Psalms later, the same word is used 10 times, and every verse calls on the entire universe to praise God. It's suddenly far more declarative. By the 150, which we'll look at in just a second, it's short, but it's intense. Every verse repeats the word hallelujah twice. That's hallelujah, hallelujah, hallelujah. We sing it more times even, but every verse pronounces it twice. It's used 10 times in 5 verses, and some suggest that's an allusion to the Decalogue. Well, people like to play those games. Well, you see 10 and you've got all sorts of connections you can make. Look at page 141. At the very top, where it says Psalm 150. This psalm brings the book of Psalms to an exultant close. The book of Psalms begins with the praise of the single righteous individual. Remember I said to you Psalm 1, Ashrei Ha'ish, the man who walks in the path of God is happy. It's in the singular. That's Psalm number 1. And the book finishes with every living being praising God. It's gone from the singular to everything in existence throughout the book. I'm pointing this out in this book because I want you to be able to go back and look at it and realize there's a lot of commentary in here really worth reading. Okay? And any questions on that, on Ashrei? Any thoughts on Ashrei? Who likes Ashrei? Go ahead. Because the Mari service was later, and it wasn't obligatory till much later. They did. It was sort of the throw-on, and when I say that, the way that that's evidenced is we don't repeat the Amidah. In the Mari service, the Amidah is never repeated. It's always silent only. It was sort of a later addition, and so. Okay. Yes, it's in his place there as well. Yeah, many synagogues will leave. Psalms are not obligations. In other words, the reading of a particular psalm, except for this 145 earlier in the service, where it's just part of the core, here it was added at a later point. It's not an obligatory prayer. And the reason for any synagogue doing or not doing, that's the individual rabbi, and you're welcome to talk to Rabbi Teller or any other rabbi about what they do in their synagogue. You know, everybody has their own customs and traditions. But there's the chovah, there's that which you must say, and there's that which is suggested you say. And within the suggested, you have a lot more flexibility. Okay, yeah. Oh, there you go. So So somebody decided you need 150 words, so let's not have a nun. We've got to figure something out. Get rid of it. Okay. I'll bring that to the seminary. Okay. Flip the page now to 143, and you have the Song of the Sea. This song, though, is so core to who we are as Jews that it's not just Shirat Hayam. We often refer to it in its simplistic sense of the song. This is the song. Of all the songs in the Bible, this is the song. This is the song of God's redemption. This is the song of God being there when we need him. As the Jews are standing there on the banks of the sea, and they see their pursuers drowned in the sea, they realize for the first time they're actually free. Their lives are no longer in danger. That's the first time that they can make that statement. And so they break out, let me finish. They break out into song. I know you're going to have a problem. I'm going to address that. Sorry, hold on one second. Okay? They break out in song. This song is read up from the Torah twice a year. It's sufficiently important. We read it both in its place in Bishalach, and then we read it again on Passover. It's read twice in the year. It has a very core place in Jewish history. It is a sense of God being the Redeemer. It was originally recited by the Levites in the temple. And so, again, a lot of the service, a lot of tradition arose in the aftermath of the destruction of the temple by rabbis who were trying to create reminders of what we would be doing if the temple was here, because they believed the temple would be rebuilt within the next 70 years. And so they created traditions that would remind you what we're supposed to do so that when we rebuild the temple in 70 years, we'll be ready to go. All right, so they put it in there. Just a quick note here. Look at the top paragraph here. It begins by mentioning Vayeru ha'am, and the people feared or revered at Adonai. Vayaminu b'Adonai, and they believed in Adonai. And Moshe Avdo, and in his servant Moses. The first thing to note is every time, there's only a couple places Moses is ever mentioned in the services at all, and every time he's referred to as Eved. Now, Eved can be slave, Eved can be servant. Yismach Moshe b'matnat chalko ki Eved ne'eman. Moses was a faithful servant. We say that in the Amidah. Moses' place is simply as an Eved, as a servant. We don't deify in any way, give any sense of holiness to Moses himself. He may have been the greatest prophets, but that's what he was, simply a prophet. There's no other claim, very deliberately. And once you get into the psalm itself, from Az Yashir, Moses' name doesn't appear. It's only in the prologue. Okay? And then it concludes, and then I'll take, and I'm going to finish up with you, because that's where I'm going to finish up at the top. It finishes up, and we sing twice. Adonai yimloch li'olam va'ed. Right? We do it twice. The Lord rules forever. That's the message here. God is eternal, and it's God only. We may have mentioned Moses as a servant, but at the end of the day, this is all about God. Your question.
So I know, like all the prayers into this Siddur initially was canonized, they're like the Mishnah to the Talmud. But how much of it, or do we know how much of it was developed? Because my understanding is after the first temple was destroyed, that's when the synagogue became a thing, and the prayers were.
So the prayers weren't fixed, although many of them were written in certain ways. The prayers weren't fixed until about the 8th century. And that's when the first prayer book really is produced. So although the prayers were in a sense structured, they weren't complete. And I'll give you an example. What was structured in the Amidah was weekday Amidah has all these blessings. Okay? What was structured was the last part, Baruch Atah. Okay? And whoever got up and davened, I have a blessing about knowledge, and God's gift of knowledge to us, got up and did a prelim of his own choice, but had to do that first and then finish up with the blessing about that topic that he was given. So the sequence of blessings and the topics of the blessings were fixed early, but what preceded them, the introductory concepts, were not. It's only in the 8th century that formally got put in. And by the way, and then you end up with both an Ashkenazic and a Sephardic Siddur relatively quickly in a short period of time. Okay? So yes, it was, the structure is fixed. The specifics, other than the blessings, were not necessarily in a fixed format. Okay, so the issue is this, you have in this prayer, Adonai ish milchama. Milchama is war. Ish is a person. Adonai ish milchama. God is a warrior, is the message. It's a little uncomfortable. All right? Particularly to modern men. It's uncomfortable. We sit in the comfort of our home and we don't worry about this. And in certain moments, like what's going on in Israel right now, somehow I'm much more comfortable with God being a warrior on our behalf. But still, it's uncomfortable. And we're not alone in that discomfort. The rabbis themselves felt the discomfort. And you see that in the Pesach Seder when we take a little bit of the wine and we dip it in, because God takes the angels to task at the Red Sea, saying they're all singing and celebrating. He says, but the Egyptians are my people too. You're celebrating? What's the story here? I'm suffering because even though this had to be, my people are all people. So we take some of our joy and we symbolically remove it from the cup of joy, the wine. Modern day examples. Yigal alone, the then Deputy Prime Minister of Israel, heard of the death of Egyptian President Nasser. And his response was the biblical injunction, in the fall of your enemies, do not rejoice. Golda Meir said that she could forgive the Arabs for killing the Jews. She couldn't forgive the Arabs for turning Jews into killers who had to kill the Arabs in response. It's not an easy concept. But again, and I can't emphasize this enough, we live in a world that is so different from history. It is so abnormal. We're not at war. And so for us, war bad. As a matter of fact, at the Tikkun, I'm going to speak about war values, Jewish war values. And you're going to see that Judaism does not believe in passivity. That's not its perspective. That's not warmongering either, all right? But war is a terrible thing from Jewish lens, but it doesn't believe in passivity as the response. And there are times in which you'll turn to God and say, help. I need God the warrior at this moment, not God the compassionate. God the compassionate won't solve my problem.
Because this passage is so violent, why do we read it on Shabbos when our Shabbos is supposed to be a day of rest?
So,
Meaning God.
right. I want you to write the Midrash. Why do we say it? Why do you think we say it?
I don't say it.
Okay, I understand. Why do you think the rabbis would want us to say it?
So it's not too late.
What is it about God we understand in this psalm, in this reading? Right. We're recognizing that, again, now, you may not like the specifics of it, and I get that. All right, and so the one thing I do say, and we've had this conversation, I don't say Adonai ish milchama, that God is a warrior. I talk about all God's redeeming and etc., but I don't say those three words because to me that sits uncomfortably. Now, who am I to change Exodus? I don't know. I understand I'm standing on very unfirm ground in so doing. But the message here is there are times we need a strong God. We need God to not be compassionate.
But God says to his angels,
Right.
why are you cheering and cheering these are my children also?
Mm-hmm.
And they die.
But God, notice the Midrash doesn't talk about the people, it talks about the angels. People are people. And people have a right to celebrate the fact that they didn't die. That's what that's about. This is about celebrating the fact that we were not killed. And sometimes killing others before we allow them to kill us is exactly the right thing to do. Right. The same way, if somebody comes with you with a gun, you have a right to try to kill them before they kill you. That's true in the collective as well. It's not, we sit in a very comfortable seat. I'm not going to, Leslie, I can't tell you you're wrong. I mean, the rabbis felt the discomfort. I'm not going to suggest you're wrong. But I do think that this is a way of saying God redeemed and made a people out of chaos and created order. In the same way, almost every religion looks forward to a day in which there'll be this ultimate redemption and true order and peace will exist in the world. There's a historical redemption, there's a future redemption. But the discomfort is there. I'm not going to deny it. I'm not going to, as I said, I'm not going to tell you you're wrong. This is another one of those struggle with it, fight with it. But there are times we need God to be far more aggressive and protect us. You know, the Holocaust, they're not sitting there saying, oh, let's get a God of compassion. That wasn't what they needed. Hard topic. All right, with that, we'll close up today. So the goal is that we will start again in the fall. I will get you a more complete schedule once we do. I'm trying to just decide a few things. Rabbi Teller will be away for a couple months on a sabbatical next year, and I'm trying to decide, am I going to teach during that time, or am I going to be enough overwhelmed that maybe that's not a good choice? So I'm trying to figure out what the schedule will look like. I may do it every other week instead, maybe find ways to blend. What's that? Well, but you know what I love these conversations, so this gives me energy too. So, all right, everyone, a good summer, a good week, a good summer. Thank you. I hope we're bringing the prayer book alive for you.